Good morning. Page 391, Chapter 14, Changing One's Fate. To defend yourself in that savage world was impossible. To go on strike was suicide. To go on hunger strikes was useless. And as for dying, there would always be time. So what was left for the prisoner? To break out? To go change one's fate? The Czechs also called escape the Green Prosecutor. He was the only popular prosecutor among them. Like all the other prosecutors, he too left many cases in their previous situation, or in an even worse situation than before, but sometimes he freed them outright. He was the green forest, he was the bushes and the greensward. Chekhov used to say that if a prisoner was not a philosopher who could get along equally well in all possible circumstances, or let us put it this way, who could retire into himself, then he could not but wish to escape, and he ought to wish to. He could not but wish to. That was the imperative of a free soul. True, the natives of the archipelago were far from being like that. They were much more submissive than that, but even among them, there were always those who thought about escape, or who were just about to. The continual escapes in one or another place, even those that did not succeed, were a true proof that the energy of the Czechs had not yet been lost. Here is a camp compound. Image 36 here. Oh, so bleak. So bleak. It is well guarded, the fence is strong, and the inner cordon area is reliable, and the watchtowers are set out correctly. Every spot is open to view and open to fire, but all of a sudden you grow sick to death at the thought that you are condemned to die right there on this bit of fenced-off land. So why not try your luck? Why not bust out and change your fate? This impulse is particularly strong at the beginning of your term of imprisonment, in the first year, and it is not even deliberate. In that first year, when, generally speaking, the prisoner's entire future and the whole prison personality are being decided. Later on, this impulse weakens somehow. There is no longer the conviction that it is more important for you to be out there, and all the threads binding you to the outer world weaken, and the cauterizing of the soul is transformed into decay, and the human being settles into camp harness. During all the years of the camps, there were evidently quite a few escapes. Here are some statistics accidentally come by. In the month of March 1930 alone, 1,328 persons escaped from imprisonment in the Russian Soviet Federation's Socialist Republic. And how inaudible and soundless this was in our society. Oh, Russian Socialist Federation. Okay. With the enormous development of the archipelago after 1937, particularly during the war years, when the battlefield infantrymen were rounded up and sent to the front, it became even more difficult to provide a proper convoy, and not even the evil notion of self-guarding could solve all the problems of the chiefs. Simultaneously with that, there was a hankering to get from the camps as much economic profit and production and labor as possible. And this compelled, particularly in logging operations, the dispatch of work parties and sub-parties on distant assignments, and their extension into more remote areas. And the guards supposedly surrounding them became even more illusory, even more unreal. By 1939, on some of the auxiliary expeditions of the Ust-Fin camp, instead of a perimeter fence surrounding the camp, there were only pole or water palings, and no nighttime illumination. In other words, at night no one kept the prisoners from departing. Even in the penalty camp, in this camp complex, when the prisoners were taken into the forest for work, there was only one armed guard for a brigade of persons. It is obvious that he had no way of keeping track of them, and 70 men escaped from there during the summer of 1939. One even escaped twice in one day, before and after lunch. However, 60 returned, and there was no news of the rest. But that was in the wilderness. In Moscow itself, 3 very easy escapes took place while I was there, from the camp sector at Kaluga gates during the day, when a young thief climbed the fence of the work compound, and with his thief's talent for a braggadocio, they sent the camp a postcard the next day saying he was off to Sochi and sending his best wishes to the camp chief. From the Marfino minicamp near the botanical gardens, the girl I've already written about, and from the same place, a young non-political offender jumped on a bus and went out to the center of town. I believe the girl they're talking about is that girl who she got away and caught a bus off the highway, and the women were so mad and they were talking about clipping her hair. I think you'll probably remember that quote. True, he had been left entirely without any guard at all. Ganged up on us, the MGB took a cavalier attitude toward the loss of a non-political offender. In all likelihood, they did some arithmetic in GULag one bright day and became convinced that it's much cheaper to prevent a certain percentage of sec losses than to establish a truly strict guard over all the many thousand points of imprisonment. And at the same time they relied on certain invisible change which kept the natives reliably in their place. The strongest of these chains was the prisoners' universal submission and total surrender to their situation as slaves. Almost to a man, both the 58s and the non-political offenders were hard-working family people capable of manifesting valor only in lawful ways, on the orders of and the approval of the higher-ups. Even when they have been in prison for 5 or 10 years, they could not imagine that singly, or, God forbid, collectively, they might rise up for their liberty, since they saw arrayed against them the state, their own state, the NKVD, the police, the guards, and police dogs. And even if you were fortunate enough to escape unscathed, how could you live afterward on a false passport with a false name, when documents were checked at every intersection, and suspicious eyes followed passers-by from behind the gateway? And the universal mood in the corrective-labor camps was, why are you standing there with your rifles? What are you watching us for? Even if you disperse, we'll make no move to go anywhere. We are not criminals. Why should we escape? And we are going to be freed in a year anyway. Amnesty. K. Strakovich relates that in 1942 his prisoner transport train was bombed while they were being taken to Uglitch. The convoy scattered, and the Zeks stayed right there, waiting for it to return. There are many such stories, like the story of the bookkeeper of the Ortotsky division of GULag. They sent him a distance of 25 miles with his financial report, accompanied by 1 convoy guard, and on the way back he not only had to haul the dead, drunk convoy guard in a cart, but also to take particular care of his rifle so the poor fool wouldn't be tried for losing it. Another chain was the death factory, camp starvation. Although it was precisely this starvation that at times drove the despairing to wander through the taiga in hopes of finding more food than there was in camp. Yet it was this starvation that also weakened them so that they had no strength for a long flight, and because of it, it was impossible to save up a stock of food for the journey. And there was another chain too, the threat of a new term. A political prisoner was given a new tenor for an escape attempt under the same Article 58, and gradually it proved best to give Article 58.14, counter-revolutionary sabotage. The thieves, it's true, were given Article 82, pure escape, and 2 years in all, but up to 1947, they got no more than 2 years for theft and also robbery, so these were of comparable magnitude. Furthermore, camp was their native home. In camp, they did not starve, they did not work. Their smartest move was to not escape but to serve out their term. All the more so because they might always benefit from special privileges or amenities. Escape for a thief was merely the sport of a well-fed, healthy body and an explosion of impatient greed, to get out and go on a spree, to rob, drink, rape, and show off. The only serious escapes among them were by bandits and murderers with long terms. The thieves loved to lie about their non-existent escapes, were wildly embroidered, the ones they did carry out. They will tell you how India, the barracks of thieves, received the challenge banner for the best preparations for winter, for the substantial amount of earth piled around the barracks wall. And they will claim they were digging a tunnel at the same time and taking the earth out right under the chief's eyes. Don't believe them. All India wouldn't escape, and they wouldn't want to dig very long because they need easier and quicker ways, and the chiefs weren't so stupid as to not see where they were getting the earth from. The thief Corsican, with 10 convictions on his record, a commandant trusted by his chief, really did escape, well-dressed, and really did pass himself off as an assistant prosecutor. But he had to add to that story how he spent the night in the same hut as the commissioner for catching escapees. They really did exist. Stole his uniform, his gun, and even his dog one night, and from then on passed himself off as the commissioner. He is lying through his teeth about all this, and their fantasies and stories of thieves always had to be more heroic than they really were. Another thing restraining the sex was not the compound but the privilege of going without convoy. The ones guarded, the least, who enjoyed the small privilege of going to work and back without a bayonet at their backs, or once in a while dropping into a free settlement, highly prized their advantages, and after an escape these were taken away. The geography of the archipelago was also a solid obstacle to escape attempts. Those endless expanses of snowy or sandy desert, tundra, taiga, the Kolyma, even though it was not an island, was more bitter than any island. It was a piece torn off from the rest, and where could you escape to from the Kolyma? People undertook escapes from there only out of desperation. It is true that there was a time when the Yakuts were hospitable to the prisoners and undertook to help them. 9 cents and I will take you to Khabarovsk. They took them there too, on their reindeer. But then, escaped thieves began to plunder the Yakuts, and the Yakuts changed toward the fugitives and started to turn them in. The hostility of the surrounding population, encouraged by the authorities, became the principal hindrance to escapes. The authorities were not stingy about rewarding the captors. This was an additional form of political indoctrination. And the nationalists inhabiting the areas around GULag gradually came to assume that the capture of a fugitive meant a holiday, enrichment, that it was like a good hunt or like finding a small gold nugget. The Tungus, the Komis, and the Kazakhs were paid off in flour and tea, and in densely settled areas in the Transvolga people living near the Burapolm and Unja camps were paid for each captured fugitive at the rate of 2 poods, 72 pounds of flour, 8 yards of cloth, and several pounds of herring. During the war years, there was no other way to get herring, and local inhabitants simply nicknamed the fugitives herrings. Oh, interesting. red herring. In the village of Chertska, for example, when any stranger appeared, the children would run along the group shouting, "Mama, there's a herring coming." I wonder if that's where red herring comes from. And what about the geologists, those pioneers of the northern wastes, those brave, bearded, booted heroes, those Jack London bold hearts? Great writer, by the way. You have to read Jack London. A fugitive had little hope or help from our Soviet geologists, and it was better not to come near the bonfires. The Leningrad engineer Abramov, arrested in the Prom Party wave and sentenced to a tenor, escaped from the Nivegrez camp in 1933. He wandered about in the taiga for 21 days, and he was delighted to meet up with some geologists. But they took him off to a settlement and handed him over to the chairman of the local trade union organization. You can understand the geologists, too. After all, they were not alone, and they were afraid of being turned in by someone in their group. And what if the fugitive was really a criminal, a murderer, and would knife them in the night? Captured fugitive, if he was dead when taken, might be thrown near the camp, mess hall, or lie for several days with a rotting bullet wound, so the prisoners would value their thin gruel more highly. One taken alive might be set in front of the gatehouse, or whenever a column passed, they would set the dogs on him, and the dogs, depending on the command given, could suffocate a person, bite him, or merely tear his clothes off, leaving him naked. And one could also make a placard in the cultural and educational section saying, "I escaped, but the dogs caught me." And this placard could be hung around the fugitive's neck, and he could be ordered to walk around the camp wearing it. And if he was beaten, then they had to burst his kidneys. If his hands were screwed into handcuffs, and it had to be done so that the feeling in his wrists and joints would be lost for good. G. Sorokin, if delayed. Or, if he was put into a punishment cell, he couldn't come out without TB. Averbakh. Baranov. Escape in 1944. After being beaten by the convoy, he coughed up blood, and 3 years later they had to remove his left lung. Properly speaking, to beat the fugitive to within an inch of his life and to kill him were the principal forms of combating escapes in the archipelago. And even if no escapes had occurred for a long time, they then sometimes had to be manufactured. At the Debin goldfields in Kolyma in 1951, a group of Czechs was permitted to go out to gather berries. 3 got lost and disappeared. The camp chief, Senior Lieutenant Pyotr Lomaga, sent torturers. They loosed their dogs on the 3 sleeping men, then smashed their skulls with the butts of their rifles until their heads were a mass of pulp and their brains hung out. And in that state they hauled them on a cart to the camp. Here the horse was replaced by 4 prisoners, who had to drag the cart past the whole lineup. "That's how it will be for everybody," proclaimed Lomaga. And who can find himself in the desperation to keep from shuddering in the face of all that, and go on, and go on, and go on, and arrive where? There, at the end of the escape, and the fugitive attained his destined and designated goal. Who was there who wouldn't be afraid to meet him, to hide him, to look after him? It was only the thieves were awaited out in freedom at a prearranged hangout. For us 58s, such an apartment would be called a conspiratorial address. And that was nearly an underground organization. That is how many obstacles and pitfalls there were in the path of escape. Sorry, I have to stop there. Oh, I wish I didn't. It's very good. Hope you have a good day.